So last weekend I held a session on API development with Django using the Django REST framework. I instructed or led a group of ladies at a Pi Ladies meetup in my country, and it was a nice session. So what I'm going to be doing is to walk you through some of the things I talked about, and I hope you find those things useful. So without wasting your time, let us jump in and learn how to build APIs using the Django REST framework. To start this video, I'm going to show you the code for this video, or the documentation for this video. I created a simple website that you can feel free to go ahead and check out if you want to follow along. And this is exactly what I'm going to be following so that we can be on the same page. So right now, all I have is an empty terminal right here. And to start, I'm going to be creating a virtual environment. I'm on Linux and I use UV to create my virtual environments on Linux, but you can create them with Venv, and UV also has a way to create virtual environments with Venv, which you can do via UV Venv. So I can pretty much run that and create a new virtual environment. So I need to first of all have a folder which is empty. I'm going to call it product inventory. Once I've created it, I'll cd into it, and then I'll run the command uv venv env. So that will go ahead and create a new virtual environment in the same way you can create it with Python. I'll press enter, and then I have to activate it. So on Linux, I have to run the command source env bin activate, and that will be it. So now I need to go ahead and install Django REST framework. I'll do that with and that will be it. One of the things you can see here is that Django is also installed, so you don't have to run a separate command to install Django. So now we have Django and Django REST framework installed. Let us go ahead and pip freeze everything to our requirements. So txt, I'll use the command pip freeze, and then I pipe, or I want to pipe, but rather redirect the output of this command to a file called requirements.txt, or uv pip because I'm using uv. So if I run uv pip freeze, that will go ahead and create a new file here called the requirements.txt, just like you see right in there. So once that is done, let me go ahead and open this up in VS Code. I'll get my VS Code, and then I will go ahead and, so this is already opened up in there. I'll close some stuff I have right here, and then it'll be good to go. So now that we have our folder, we have our project, we have created a new virtual environment, activated it. Next is going to be to start a Django project. Now, by having UV installed, or by having Django REST framework installed, we have access to the Django admin command, and we can run that through UV run. Now, when using UV, you can run all the executables that you have within your environment for the dependencies you've installed, and that can be through UV run. If I run UV run, I can now see that we have Django admin installed. So if I want to use that, I can say UV run Django-admin. So that can give us access to all those commands. Now what I need to do is to uv run Django admin, start project, and then I'll create the project in a folder called core, which I want to create in the current project folder. So if I press enter, that will go ahead and create for us a new Django project. And now we see our core and our manage.py is created. Next, we're going to go ahead and run our server. To do that, we shall go ahead and use either uv run or uv python, whatever you may want, as long as you're in your virtual environment. So I'm going to use the command uv run manage.py run server. I'm going to run my server on localhost 8000, not localhost 8000, port 8002. So once this is done, if I navigate to localhost 8000, I'll now see that our Django installation worked successfully. So that's like the first part right here, setting up your project. Next thing is to go ahead and create our first API endpoint. So in Django, you always create a view, and a view is either a function or a class, and what that does is to help you get a request and then return a response. To explain this more, let me go to my project level urls.py, and this is where I'll create our first API view. So I'll delete some of the code I have here, and then we shall begin from here. So what we have here is basically the URL configuration that is global, and that is our project specific global URL configuration. This is where I'm going to create our first API view, and then we shall go ahead and create an app in which we shall create all the other views that we shall use for a simple CRUD API. To start, we need to import the following. First, we shall need to import the REST framework. We shall import the REST framework decorator called the API view decorator. This decorator is what will transform a view function into an API view. And we can also specify the HTTP methods we shall use on that view using the decorator. Next, we shall also import the REST framework response class. So we shall do that from REST framework.responses. I'll import response. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and then explain what an API view is. So to create an API view in Django REST framework, you have to create this decorator right here, or call the decorator. This takes in a list of HTTP method names. So we're going to provide the get method as the HTTP method that we're going to be using for our first view. And then we shall go ahead and define a function. So this is going to be the handler for that request. This takes in a request object just like any other normal Django view, and then it return a response. Django views by default will return the HTTP request class, but in Django REST framework, if you're to return a response, you use the response class, and that's what we've imported. This takes in the data you want to return. That data has to be JSON serializable. For example, in this case, we're going to just simply return a simple message, and that message will be a dictionary containing a hello world message. And then you can specify other things like status codes, template name, and so on and so forth. But for our case, let's leave the status out because the status will be the 200 OK status code by default, and that will be just enough for us to have our first view. So to make this view accessible, or something that our server is going to be accessed on, or a URL that's going to be present on our server, we'll then need to register that in our project level configurations. I'm going to put this on our root URL and then map this root URL on our index view. And once I'm done, this is just enough for us to have our server return that response. If I go back right here, nothing is wrong. Our server is running. If I go back here, we now see template that does not exist, REST framework /api.html. The reason as to why this is happening is because Django REST framework is an app, so we need to register it on our project level settings installed apps list. If I go back to our code, that's going to be found in core/settings.py. If I go to the installed apps list in here, I can easily just add a third party apps section, and that is where I will register the REST framework app. So that's going to be the Django REST framework. And once I do that, if I go back here, I'll now see our response being returned of hello world. So we have successfully been able to return our first response from our API. So this UI right here is what they refer to as the browsable API. It's a simple API client that the Django REST framework provides you out of the box. This can help you be in position to carry out requests to the API without having to go to a tool like Postman. It also allows you to see what the browser will show in case you show the data as plain JSON. So if I go to plain JSON, this is what I'll be able to see. If I pretty print, that will be a new response from our simple API. And let's see is this entire section right here. So this is the first chapter or the second chapter of this simple documentation right here. The next part is creating a simple CRUD API. When creating an application, you are going to always have data. For any application that has data, you're going to have 4 major operations you're going to perform on that data, and those are the CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete data. So once you have that in mind, you can then model your API endpoints to have a structure that will help you be able to perform these actions, and that's what we're going to be doing for this section. So if we go down here, I have the map of what we are going to create at first. Note that these are not RESTful kind of routes, but we shall model them later when we get to class-based views. So one thing to understand here is that we're going to first of all use this approach of creating these API views where we have our API view decorator decorating a function. And then as we move on, I'll introduce you to class-based views in which we shall then go ahead and follow the Django class-based view or object-oriented way of creating such views. So what I'm going to do is to then create all the CRUD endpoints we're going to be doing for our CRUD API. But to start, of course, we're going to need some kind of data model. So we shall first of all create a products app. That's something that is in the documentation. So let me close some of the stuff I have here. I'll head over back to this terminal of mine, stop our server with Control and C. And once that is done, I'll then run uv run manage.py start app. And then I'll call this our products app. Inside this products app is going to be our Django app, but we first of all need to register it in our core settings. So I'll go to core/settings, and that's where we have to add it in this list of installed apps. So I'm going to create another section right here for local apps, and that's where we shall have our products app. So I'm going to add this in quotes and also add a comma right here to make it a valid Python list. So once that is done, we now have our products app created. We have created it and registered it on our app. So once that is done, then we're now going to create our simple product model. Well, let's first of all actually create the URLs and the functions for the CRUD views. So I'm going to head over to products, go to views.py, and then I'll go in here, import the same things. Like we shall first of all import our REST framework decorator for our views. And then we shall import the response class. Once that is done, we shall now go ahead and simply create our API views. So I'll say at API view, and then I'll define the handler for this. So this will be our product list. This will take in a request, return a response. But for now, we shall just pass it, or shall just go ahead and skip it. I'll do the same for all the other remaining CRUD endpoints. So I'm going to come right here, paste this, until we have all of the endpoints that we need. So I'm going to rename these according to the action they perform. So we're going to have this being post, and then this will be product create, and then we shall pass it. So I'll do the same thing for get. So instead of getting, this will be our product detail. Instead of returning the list, this will retrieve an item by its ID. So we shall provide the product ID. Once that is done, we shall now navigate to product update. So I'll just basically change the method to put, and then product list here will be product update, and then delete. So I'll say product underscore delete. This will have the request and then return a response. So once this is done, we are now in position to go ahead and implement all these. But before we do that, we need to have these view functions mapped onto their specific URLs. And I'm going to be following the same structure I set up right here. And then we shall look at how we can transform into REST style endpoints. So if I go to our folder right here, which is our app folder, I'll create a new urls.py, and then this is where we're going to have our URL patterns. In Django, if you want to create a URL mapping, you're going to import a function called path from django.urls, and then you're going to create a list called the URL patterns list. Django will always look for this list in every file you define your URL mapping, so it's important that you keep that as URL patterns. Next, we're going to create our first URL pattern. So I'm going to speed code through this, and then we shall introduce our views. I'll go at the top right here. I'll say from just like that, we'll have our URLs defined. So let's go ahead and implement our CRUD. So to have our CRUD work, we have to first of all have a database model. And to create that, we shall need to create it in our models.py inside our product. Now, lucky for us, we have that in the document right here. So I won't waste a lot of time trying to create it. I'll go ahead and copy this model from here. I'll add it here. Maybe the only modification I'm going to be doing is to add a simple set of fields. So I'm going to add the created at and updated at field. I'll use auto now equals true. So that will basically keep track of the time at which we update the object. All right. So next thing is going to be to register that item on our admin. I'm going to go right here and import our model. So I'll say from .models, we're going to import our product. And then we shall write this line, which is admin.site.register. So that will take in the model class, and that will be our product model. So once we are done with that, we need to now run our migrations. So to run those, of course, I have to activate my environment. And once it's activated, I'll then go ahead and create a super user after creating or applying all the changes to our database. By default, Django will provide you with an SQLite database, so you don't have to set everything up from scratch, and that's what we're going to be using for this video. I'm going to begin by running uvrunmoney.py, make migrations, and uvrunmoney.py migrate. So this will apply both existing and the new migration that we've so far created. So once this is done, let us now go ahead and access or create a new super user so that we access our admin. I'll go to my terminal right here, run the app or run the command uvrun create super user, create my default user as that. I'll give them a name or an email address and then a password. So for development purposes, even if I keep it simple. All right, so we now have a super user. Let's go ahead and run our server again. So I'll say uvrun money.py. So I'm just going to search for the run server command. And when we start our server, I'll now go to our browser right here. And this time, if I go to localhost 8000, I'll now see our index returned right here. So the first API endpoint we're going to be implementing is going to be the one to list all of our products. We now have our views defined right here, the URL configurations, and the model. So the first thing we're going to do is to create what is called a serializer class. And just like I explained, the serializer helps you to transform one data format into another data format. In this case, I mean we're going to transform our database model objects into JSON. So we're going to create that class right here in our products app. I'll add a new serializers .py module. This serializers.py module will make use of our model, which is our product model. So I'll have to import it here by saying from models or from .models. We are going to go ahead and import the product model. Once that is done, we shall now import Django REST Framework serializers by saying from REST Framework import serializers, and then we shall create our serializer. So serializer is going to be a class that's going to be created or subclassing the serializer class. So to create a very simple serializer class, we are going to create a class called product serializer. And we're going to now go ahead and subclass serializers.model serializer. Now the model serializer is a special kind of a serializer. What it does is to help us be in position to deal with other database models directly. So in case you want to do things like saving, updating data without syncing or writing all that code, then our model serializer is going to be handling all that stuff for us. So we need to define a meta class in here. This is very similar to how you implement forms in Django if you are familiar with the framework. And you'll define new models. So our case, our model is going to be the product model, and then the sets of fields we want to use in our serializer. So if we want to use all fields, we shall use standard all. So those will be the fields on our serializer. It will pick all the fields from our database model, just like you see right here. Once you've created this class, I'm going to copy this and import it in our serializers, or import it as our serializer in our views. So I'm going to get rid of this, come right here, create a new serializer instance. This is going to be an instance of the product serializer class. So our serializer object is going to be a product serializer instance, which is not defined. So I have to import it here. I can say from .serializers import the product serializer. So at first we'll need to define what kind of data the serializer instance is going to take in, and that's going to be our product, but we haven't yet defined that. And since we want to return a list of items, we shall then go ahead and say many equals true. So that will go ahead and return a list of many products, or an array of products in our response. So let's go ahead and perform that query, or provide the query set that the serializer will use. I'll use product, or products is going to be equal to product, which is our model, dot objects dot all. So we're going to go ahead and import that. I'll go at the top right here and say from dot models shall import the product model, and that will be just enough for us to basically work with our model. So after querying for all our products, we shall implement our serializer, or create an instance of our serializer. We shall serialize that data. Then we shall just go ahead and return a response with the data. So the data has to be something JSON serializable, and for us to access the serialized data, we shall use serializer.data, and then we can provide a response status, so a status code for our response. But we can do that through the REST framework status module. So if we go ahead and import that, we can say from REST framework import status, and then you can provide a status code we want to run. So for our case, that's going to be HTTP 200. Okay, so all status codes can be accessed via REST framework.response. So since we've already created the URL for that in our urls.py, that's in our product URLs, we can now access the response from this. So what this will do is to query for all items in our database and then serialize the response, return an array of objects, and then return our response. So if we go and basically do that, we shall head over to our browsable API. And if I navigate to /products, we shall now see that that is not yet accessible. The reason as to why that's not yet accessible is because you haven't yet provided that product URL as a list of URLs or URL patterns that can be accessed on our server. So if I go to our project level URLs.py, I need to include the URLs for our simple application. So to do that, I have to first of all import a function called include, and that is what will help us to include those URLs. So I'm going to create a mapping like the ones we have in existence, where the products prefix will help us to access all URLs that are found in our products.urls.py. So that's exactly what this line does right here. This time, if we go back to our page, our browsable API, we now see we have an empty list of items. So the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and log into the admin or the Django admin with our simple user or simple admin user. So I'll go to localhost 8000/admin. And in here is where we shall provide the name of the super user we created. So I'll provide the username and the password, and that will log me in. So since we've registered our model on our admin, we now see we can be able to manage product information on here. So I'm going to add a simple product right here. That's going to be our Ford Raptor. And then I'll add a description. This is a track. And then I'll add the price. So let me say 40,000 US dollars in stock. Let's say we have 12, and I save. So that's going to be our first product. Let me add another one. So let me say Toyota Noah. So that's going to be a van. And then I can add the price. Let's say 12,000. And then the price for the stock is going to be 2. So those are 2 products we have right now. So to test our product list, if I refresh, this time we see that our API endpoint is going to return our list of products the moment I go ahead and hit that endpoint or make a request to that endpoint. We can make things a little bit more interesting by ordering our items. So I can go back to our views in our products, and instead of just returning all the products, we can order them by the date at which they created, because I've added those fields. So I can say order by negative created at and save. So if I go back right here, refresh, now see that item number 2 exists on the top of the list while item number 1 exists at the bottom, which is interesting. So that is just simple API request. What is happening is we are fetching data from the API, and through our Serializer class, we are then transforming that into the kind of response that the client will need. And that's what we're doing right here. So once this is done, let's now go ahead and implement another endpoint. The endpoint we're going to be working on is the one for fetching a product detail. So first of all, going to get the product. I'm just going to create a new variable called product. This is going to be a query for our product or the product object. So I'll say product objects.get. And in this case, I'll provide ID is equal to product ID. The problem with using get to get objects from the database is that in case the product is not found or the object is not found, you're going to land into a not exist or does not exist error, which is an exception that can lead to a server error. So for us to prevent that, I'm going to wrap this code block inside a try except block, and this will basically catch that specific error. So we can do something like the model, which is product dot does not exist, which is an exception, and then we can raise an HTTP exception, or we can just return, let me just return a response with the error. So I can say return response, and then I can just provide a dictionary with an error. So our error in this case is going to be product not found. So please keep that in mind whenever you're working with objects.get. So I'm going to specify the status here to be status.http 404 not found. And that will be our simple response right there. So once that is done, we're now going to do the same thing we have done. Though for this case, we are returning only one product object. So for us to do that, we're going to say that our serializer instance is going to be equal to product serializer. And in this case, the instance or the object we want to provide is going to be our product. Shall say product. And once we are done with that, we shall return a response. So I'll come right here, copy paste this, and now this is going to be HTTP 200. Okay. And then we shall return serializer.data as our response. So if I say the add data in this case, it's going to be equal to serializer.data. That will be our response right there. So I can format this to make it look a little bit better, and that's what we shall have right there. But this time we shall be basically accessing the URL which is found on the /product ID endpoint. So if we go back here and refresh, if I now go to product /1, which is the product ID, we shall now get the item with the product ID of 1. If I go to product ID 2, that will lead us to product with the ID of 2. If I go to, let's say, product ID 20, shall see that our product is not found. And that is basic responses that we are writing in our code. So this is like hand-coded stuff, but I'm going to be showing you how to simplify it with the Django REST framework. Another thing that's interesting about our browsable API is that we can be able to see links to the different parts of our API. So for our case, we have the index, which takes us to the hello world request. We have the product list that brings us to the list endpoint right here. And then we can move to the product detail where we can specify an ID of a product, for example, product number 2. So that's basically what we have right there. Now, the next endpoint we're going to be implementing is the /create endpoint. This is one to be accessed via the post request, and then we shall be able to submit data, use our serializer to save that data to our database. So that is also easy because all we need to do is to now go right in our serializer right here, or let me actually first pass this for now and head over back to our serializers. So we need to now create a serializer that will have only fields that will be necessary to create our product. So I'll copy what we have at the top right here, and instead of calling this a product serializer, we shall create it and call it the product create serializer. So this will be working on our model, but this time we're going to have the fields we shall be submitting. You can think of it like a form that is going to validate the data we send to our API. And then this form will still be used to save, just like how you see your Django model forms work. So for now, we shall use our fields. We're going to be making use of our name, we shall make use of our description, and then we shall also add the stock and the price. So once that is done, now we can go ahead and also import this. I'll copy the name, go back to our view right here, import that right here. So I'll say product create serializer, then we shall go to product create right here. So once that is done, we now need to create an instance of this serializer with the data that is coming in from our client. So how do we get the data from our client? This request object right here is one that will get all the data that is going to come from our client via post request. So we can say that data is going to be equal to request dot data, and then we can create our serializer with that data, or our instance with that. So whenever you create a serializer you're going to be using to save, it's very important that you specify the data attribute using data equals and then the data you want to provide for that attribute. And once we create that serializer instance, we can now check for its validity using the if serializer dot is valid. So this is like a function you call on your serializer, similar to what you do with forms. It will return true if all the fields match the descriptions on your serializer, of which this is picked from the model actually. So it will check on your model if the fields are being defined the way they are defined on the model, and then return true or false based on the validations. So if your serializer is valid, you can then proceed to save using the serializer via the serializer.save command. And once that is done, everything will be okay. So you have to return the response. So we can say return response, and in this case our data will be equal to our serializer.data, and then we shall return a status of HTTP 200, okay, or 201 created. So that will be a created status code. It's very important that you use the right status code for creating. You have a 201 created status code. So once that is done, you'll then catch the else. So if our serializer is valid, we expect to return the data as well as a 201 created status code showing that the product has been created successfully. But in case it's not created, then we need some sort of way to return all the errors. Lucky for us, Django REST framework can use our serializer to return those errors, similar to how you return them in a Django form. If validation fails, you can get form.errors, and in Django REST framework you can still access form, actually serializers.errors. And for those client-side requests, the errors will be best represented using a 400 bad request error. So that's basically what we're doing right here, and that will be create endpoint right here. So if we go back here and say products/create, we'll now see that method not allowed, but we are provided with a form that we can use to send our data. So keep in mind that this will accept us to send JSON. That's why you see application/JSON, and then we see multi-part form data. That's in case we are sending, like, let's say, data with uploads, and then you can send form URL encoded data. But in case we want to send JSON, then we're going to specify the media type as application/JSON, and in the content text field right here, or text area, that's where we're going to now write the JSON that we're going to send to our server. And then when I hit post, this will return the 201 created status code, and then a response with the data that is specific to that object we are from creating. So if I go back to our product list, we now have that item being added to our list of products that we have in the database. And that is our create endpoint right there. So if I try to get that product, I can return the item detail or the product detail for that specific product. So that's basically simple CRUD. So let's finish up. We're going to now implement the product update and the product delete endpoint so that we move on to something else. So to implement those, I'm going to go in here. The process of updating is going to be very similar to that of creating, though in this case what you're going to need is the data coming from the client as well as the object you need to update. So in this case, I will go ahead and update this to include the product ID in its parameters. So I'll say product ID, and then I'll query for the item. I'm going to be doing the same thing that I was doing here. So I'll try or copy up to where I will create the instance. So we're going to try get the product by ID, and then we shall accept to throw the error showing that the product is not found. So I'm going to also get the same accept block right here. So this will get the product by ID, and then we shall create the serializer. But then when it comes to updating a product using the model serializer, we have to provide the product we want to update as the instance. And then we want to go ahead and also provide the data that we're going to use to update the product. So data is going to be equal to the request data, which is request dot data. And once we have that, we're going to simply do the same thing we did here, where we get to serialize or check if the serializer is valid, and then we shall save. Else we return the errors. So let me copy the code that we have right here and paste it inside here. So once we've got the data from the client, we serialize it and we create or specify the instance which we are going to use to modify with that data. After doing that, we check if the serializer is valid, and if it's valid, we save and then tell the user that their data has been updated successfully. What I can actually do is to also go ahead and sort of like modify or customize the response instead of returning only that data. So I can add a simple dictionary with the data being the serializer data, and then we can have a message notifying that something went successfully or something failed. So what I'm going to be doing here, let me format things here. So I can say that this is going to be a message telling the consumer or the client that the product is updated successfully. And then we can also basically do the same thing for creating, where we can have product created successfully. So if I go to where we create a product, I can easily modify this to have the same. So I can say, let me actually just remove what we have here, replace it here, remove this extra data, and that's what we shall have. So instead of product updated, here I shall say product added successfully. I'll then format everything, and that's exactly how we have it. So when you create a product, we shall have that message of product created successfully plus the data and the status code. Here, since we are updating, we're not going to be using the 201 created status code. We shall be using the 200 okay status code. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to head over back to our browsable API right here. If I go to /product/3/update, if you're wondering where that is coming from, that will be our product ID /update. If I come back right here and say update, I'll now see method not allowed, and we can still be able to achieve the same things. So let's try to update this. Let me try to see what that product is. If I refresh, product number 3 is the Honda CRV. So let me just go ahead and make some few edits to that. I'll come here, name, finish that, say put, and now see product updated successfully and our response has been returned. And this time if I go back here, if I refresh, I see this is a small SUV, the price has been updated, which is fine. And yeah, that's our data right there. So when it comes to the delete request, we're not going to be doing that on our UI right here. The reason that's why we're not going to be doing that is because Django REST framework doesn't support that kind of request in case we're using the browsable API and function-based views. But when it comes to class-based views, we're going to look at how that can be done easily. So let's go ahead and implement the delete request. If I come right here, this is going to be a /product ID /delete. And for us to implement that, we shall then add that code right here. So what are we going to do exactly? We're going to get the product by ID, and once we get it and it exists, we're going to delete the item. Else, we want to return a response that shows that the product does not exist. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to come right here, and what I'll do is to copy what I did here, paste it down here. So we're going to remove everything, even the serializer stuff, and then we shall just remain with the part where we get the product by its ID. So I'm going to just provide this as a parameter to our handler or our view right here. And yeah, so after getting the product, then we're going to delete it using product.delete. So since this is going to return no response, we shall just return a response without any body. So we shall say return response status is going to be equal to status.http 204 no content, and then 404 in case the product is not found. So I'm going to try this out using an API client, and I'm going to be using RESTFox for this specific video. So to perform the delete request, I'm going to be using this tool called RESTFox. That is a really lightweight API client I like to use, and it's similar to Postman, though the thing I love about it is that it doesn't save any data to the cloud. So I can pretty much load my API requests and use them locally without having to always save them to the cloud, which is amazing. So to start, I'm going to create a new HTTP request, and I'm going to call this delete product. Once that is done, I'll then come right here, provide the URL, which is going to be our localhost 8000 /products/3, which is the ID of the product we want to delete, and then /delete. When you send this, it's going to say method not allowed. That's because this is supposed to be a delete request. So if I say I'm going to change the method to delete, this time I'll send, and now I see this error right here. So we're required to add that /. Right after doing that, we see that our response is being returned, which is no content. So this will be the last time I'll be using this. We shall move to the browsable API, but I feel like this request is not something you can do on the browsable API. So going back to our browsable API, if we try to get our items once again, we now see our products are still being returned. The item is not deleted yet, so there's something that we are doing. I needed to add these extra parentheses right here, and that will delete the item. So if I try to send this again, this time we shall now see that we only have 2 items. So that's our delete request right there. And that's how you implement simple CRUD using Django REST framework. So the next thing I talk about is class-based views, and these are Django's ways of helping you implement object-oriented styles of programming these views. So just like you create class-based views in Django, you can create class-based views in Django REST framework. And instead of having your functions being decorated, you can just define a class that inherits from the API view class. Now in Django, you have the view class, but in Django REST framework, you have the API view class as the base class for all the API views you create when dealing with the API views in Django REST framework. So let's create a simple API view. I'm going to take you back to what we did in our core urls.py. And that's where we're going to go ahead and pretty much change this function-based view to a class-based view in Django REST framework. So how do we do that? So to start, we're going to first of all define the view class. So the view class in this case is going to be our index view, and I'm going to change that to an API view. So all API views inherit from a class called API view. And to import this class, we are going to go to REST-framework.views. So I'll say from REST framework, excuse me, .views, we are going to import the API view class. And once we've imported this API view class, we can now simply define the method that is going to be accessed on as a method on the class. So if we wanted to perform a GET request, which I'll just define a method called the GET method, and that will take in a request and return a response, just like we've done right here. And then we can change how we mapped it onto a URL by removing index and then providing a function-based view, or the class-based view in this case. Sorry for that mistake. So to make this work, we can call that .asView method on that object, and that will be just enough for us to have that as our class-based view. So if we head over back to our browsable API, we go to our index. Now see index of view gets start, but two are given. So this has to be a valid method. So you have to provide self. And if you don't, Python or Django framework will think that whatever you provided as the only parameter will be self. So you need to take care of that. If I go back here and refresh, we now see that our API view works well. So yeah, that's basically how you create an API view. So I'm going to go and change what we have in our views.py to be class-based views. To do that, we're going to go ahead and import the API view class. So I'll say from REST-framework.views, shall import the API view class. And once we've imported that, we shall now modify this step by step. I'm going to speed code through this so that you guys do not have to watch me code this all. So these right here are all the views that have then become API views. One thing to note here is that when you define an API view, you're going to inherit from the view class or the view parent class. And since we are implementing them from scratch, we are now making use of the API view from Django's framework. Each of the methods we define to be the ones that clients will use to access will be defined as methods on the object. However, there are other methods that are present on every API view class. And if you want to learn how those work, you can basically go ahead and check out the class's definition, just like you see right here. But the most important thing to understand is that a get method will be a get method on the class, just like you see right here. A post method will be a post method on the class, just like you see right here. Patch, put, delete, all those will be methods you define on the class, just like you see right here. But you can of course simplify them further, just like we're going to be seeing using the generic API views. So Django provides generic API views, and those are actually, what I was trying to say is Django's framework provides generic API views similar to how Django provides generic views. And those help you to perform most of the CRUD boring functionality that you would write in case your goal was to implement just simple CRUD. And those are found within REST framework.generics. So let's go ahead and import that. So I'll say from REST framework.views. Actually, that's REST framework.generics. And then I'll import the views. So you can pretty much implement all your CRUD using classes that are already built for you. Classes like the list API view, the create API view, the update API view, and the destroy API view. These classes are just available for you to use without having to think about the CRUD so much. Let's go ahead and update our endpoints to make use of these. So what I'm going to do is to change this by removing what we have here. So all this code is going to go. I'll simply go ahead and pass this for now. Head over here and change this from product list view, which is an API view, to a list API view. And the only thing I have to provide here is going to be the serializer class, So our serializer class is of course the product serializer class which we created. So I'll say product serializer, and then I have to provide the query set. So the query set is what will be returned. So for that case, you can do something like product dot objects dot all, and then dot order by negative date created or created at. So that will be just enough code for us to have our product list view. To see this in action, you have to first of all change how we mapped that onto a URL. So instead of product list right here, I'm going to say views dot product list view dot as view, and then we shall keep the name to product list. So once that is done, then I'll go ahead and save. If you head over back to our browsable API here, I did some copying right here where I just, for the sake of the video, just copied these endpoints and added them to our views.py. So I'm going to be doing the same thing for this, but okay, let me go ahead and just do the same thing for our generic class-based views. So I'll just go right here, copy paste what I have here, and then I'll just explain. So I'll go ahead and replace all our views right here with our generic views. And that will be our API endpoint. So to take you back to the views, you now see how little, or basically how Django's framework simplifies the whole thing of implementing CRUD endpoints, because all you have is a subclass of a generic view class like the list API view right here. So this will just basically list a query set, and then the detail view will be the one to retrieve a model instance. So you can just basically provide the primary key. Of course, these won't be product IDs anymore. The class-based views will make use of the primary key, or PK, as the ID for instances on which you want to carry out that CRUD. So that's one thing to note. Now, to come back here, create, you just take in the serializer you want to use to create. To update, you take in the serializer you want to update, and then you provide the query set. So it makes it very easy for you to implement this CRUD without thinking so much. And all that can be tested by going back and simply making those requests to your API, like how we have here. You can go to our /products. We can see the item being returned. You can pretty much go ahead and try to perform your requests the same way, and you'll see your items being returned. So this is a very nice way in which you can carry out your CRUD without having to think so much about all the underlying things that are happening when you're performing your CRUD. So I'll change the ordering here to order by negative created at, and that will help us to change that. So if I come right here, refresh, you now see that ordering has changed. So that's basically CRUD endpoints already generated for us. Now this can also get more interesting because Django REST framework implements more generic views that perform all those functionalities, and that's where the other REST framework or RESTful kind of path operations come in. So if you want to name, or if you want to generate your API and be able to perform your CRUD and in a truly RESTful way, then you're going to be using these classes, which are generic views, but they perform more than just one action. For example, we know that the product list view and the product create view are going to be always in REST accessed on the same URL. So for example, if you have /products, then you have to just implement /products, but then with a GET request and a POST request. So instead of having list and then create, you can just have a list create API view. So that also exists, and it's basically list create API view. Then you can also have the create, or It's actually the list create API view, then update destroy view. It's actually retrieve, update, destroy API view. So these two classes can pretty much help you to go ahead and do everything you did right here by just writing two classes. So I also have that inside here. I'm just going to copy it so that you can go ahead and see how this works. So rather than having all these endpoints, we just want to have REST style endpoints or RESTful endpoints. So you can just say product list create view that takes in a list create API view. Or that's basically a subclass of that class. And all we have to define is the serializer class. And depending on what we want to do and the request we want to do, this is the method we use to get the serializer class and therefore update the serializer class. So normally, if you specify get serializer class, or if you specify your serializer class, you can be able to get it via get serializer class. But then we can modify it by saying give self.request.method equals post. That's if we are creating, use this product create serializer, and that will override the get serializer class method. So we can do the same thing here. If we are updating and deleting, we can of course use the product as create serializer, and that will be just the case. So this is very important. It's just the fastest way you can create your CRUD without having to think so much about writing so much code. And then of course you'll have to update your endpoints. So instead of having all these, we can just remove them and then have int primary key and then the root endpoint. So this will be in our views, that will be product list create API view. So I'm going to change this, and then I'll also change this to retrieve destroy whatever view. So this will be retrieve update destroy view, and then we shall have all our API endpoints. And the beauty is that if we go back to our browsable API right here, we can pretty much perform everything on our UI right here. We can go to product index, then we go to /products. Let me go to localhost 8000 /products. And then that will take us to our list of products. We see that we can also create a product right here by filling this form. If we navigate to, let's say, product /2, we can see the detail. We can see a delete button where we can delete the item. We also have a form for updating that instance that we've got on that endpoint. So these are truly RESTful endpoints, and all this is being done by Django REST Framework under the box. So Django REST Framework is very powerful, and I sometimes wish that most of these modern niche frameworks could have the features that the Django REST Framework has. That would be amazing. API development inside frameworks would be really easy. Now let us proceed. The next section goes ahead and talks about pagination, sorting, and filtering. Now pagination, of course, is the feature that you have in applications. For example, if I'm to take you to Amazon.com, you're going to notice that Amazon is going to have all these varieties of products or categories of products, but then they can be many, like thousands or if not millions of products. But you can go ahead and let's say go to dresses, and then you see various kinds of dresses, and these can be as many as thousands of dresses, so you cannot scroll through them. What most modern web applications do is to give you this functionality where you can browse through them by viewing items per page. So that kind of functionality where you have chunks of the entire array kind of improves the user experience. So rather than scrolling through 10 million items or millions of items, all you have to do is to just go to a page and you'll access those pages, or move to the previous page and move to the next page. And that's what Django REST Framework provides inbuilt into the framework. So that's what pagination is. And of course, you can basically check out very many types of pagination. You can have limit offset pagination, where you provide the number of items you want to skip, and REST framework will just return the items without the items you've skipped. For example, if you say you want to go to skip to the next 10 items, it will just skip to those next 10 items and return that response. So let's see this in action. For us to do any settings in Django REST framework, we'll have to do that in our settings.py, and we have to provide a dictionary. That dictionary has to be the REST framework dictionary. So inside here is where we perform all Django REST framework specific settings, and we provide them by providing a key. So in this case, we want to set a default pagination class. This is going to be the default pagination class. So the default pagination class we want to use is going to be our REST framework .pagination. I think I made a spelling mistake right here. .limit offset pagination. So if you provide this, what is going to happen is that on every list endpoint we have within our app, we are going to have each paginated, or we're going to have our list paginated. So for me to show this, I'm going to be populating my database with some data, and I have a script I wrote for that in my GitHub repository right here. If I go to the file called create.data.py, that's where I wrote this code that populates my database with like 30 plus products with information about cars. So I'm going to bring that file in. I will create it here in the root of our project. I'll create it as create.data.py, and then I'll paste whatever I've got into that file. So once I've done doing that, I'll go ahead and just add from products.models, import product, and then I will basically go ahead and will import that file so that we get to create that data. If you to look into this file, all we just have is a list of dictionaries, and then we loop through that dictionary, create all the products, save them to the database. So to be able to do that, I'll go here in my terminal, stop the server with Ctrl+C, then I'll run uv run money.py shell so that I can get access to the Python interpreter inside our Django project, or our Django space, or our Django environment. Now, all I need to do is to say from create data, or I'll just import the entire module. Since it has the code, it will execute. So I'll say import create data. Now that will be a valid Python module, and our cars will be created successfully. To confirm that, I'll go to our admin right here. Our server is not running, so I need to restart it. I'll press Ctrl+Z, and then I will run server, and then we shall move back here. So if I go to localhost 8000/products, and now see all this product data has been added. All right, so now I was talking about pagination. If you go to our list endpoint right here, we're now going to see that we still have a long list of items being returned. So I need to specify the default page size. So page size is going to be the number of items per page, and that will kind of compress or create the chunks and pages for that long list of data we have. So by providing page size, I can specify 100 items or 10 items depending on how big the data is. So if I go to my settings, I'll go back to the REST framework settings dictionary here, and then add page size. So now I expect that since we have 30 items or 30 plus items, we shall then have like 3 pages. If I provide 10 as the number of items per page and head over back to our list create view, if I refresh, we now see the 10 items will be returned for our first page. And the interesting thing is we shall return the count in the response. We shall also return the next link. So that will be used to offset 10 items or to skip to the next 10 items. And then we shall have the previous being null since this is our first page. And even here on our browsable API, will have pages 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that will be basically how we make our requests. So this is a very useful feature that helps users to navigate over long lists of items on your API. And Django just has a class that you can easily add that makes it very easy to implement such kind of pagination. Another kind of pagination is the page number pagination. So what this does is to basically organize everything to be accessed via pages. So here, all you need to do is to specify the limit. So you can limit to, let's say, 10 items, or limit to 12 items, or limit to 3 items, and then you offset by skipping a certain number of items. When it comes to page number pagination, all you have to do is to specify a page. For as long as you have a predefined number of items you want per page, then that is what will be returned. So if I go back to my settings right here and change from limit offset pagination to page number pagination, if I specify the number of items to be 10, then this is what will happen. If I refresh now, I go to page number 2. So that is going to be our pages. Now I need this to not be the limit offset pagination. So I want those gone. Let me go to /product. So now we see that the query param will provide is going to be page instead of limit and offset. So this will just navigate depending on how many items we specified per page, or what we provided inside the default pagination class. Now, what if we wanted our pagination to be specific to a specific view? So that's where we can set the pagination on a specific API view. So let me show you how to do that. You go to your views. Here we have our product list create view. And then one of the attributes you're going to provide is going to be the pagination class. And then this will take in the pagination class. So I'm going to go ahead and import our limit offset, or our page number pagination. So I'll say from REST framework dot pagination shall import the page number pagination. And once we are done doing that, I'll provide it in here. And then we'll say this is going to be our page number pagination. Once that is done, you'll have your pagination work the same way. Then same thing here for permission classes and all the other things. So if you want to set the page size, I'll set it to 10, and then we have our page size right in here. So if I go back here, we'll have our pagination still existing on our list view, or list API view, just like you see right here. So that's basically an interesting feature that Django provides. Another thing that Django provides out of the box without having to install third-party libraries is the filtering. So filtering is a very complex thing, because with filtering, you have to provide an attribute and then a value you want to use to filter for that attribute. Django REST Framework provides you multiple approaches, and then you can also use third-party libraries like Django Filter, just like I'm going to show you. But let's start with a very simple example. The example I'm going to be showing is one in which you first of all filter using the query set. So remember that in our view, or our class-based view, we have this method called a getQuerySet method that helps you to get this query set attribute or object that you define on your class. So we can use that to modify how we get items from, or filter items in our queries. So once we provided this, let's say product.objects.all, let me change this to b.order by negative created at. So once we've defined our query set to be something like that, we can go ahead and do something like def get query set. So this will be the method to return that object right there. And then we specify what we want. So in this case, we want to check if we have any params or any request params. So how do we get our parameters? To get our parameters, we get them through request.get. But since this is a class view or a class-based view, we can access our request object via self.request. So this will be the mapping of our it will be the mapping or the dictionary containing our query parameters. So here we can say params is going to be equal to request.get, and then since this is a dictionary, we can get an attribute by using get, and then we can also provide none as the default. So what I want is to get our parameter. Let's say we want to filter items by the name. If I say name is going to be self request get, and then let's say the query parameter we're going to be using is going to be name. We want to check for products or be able to filter with products once we provide a name. So we may do something like if name is not none. That means if we are to provide let's say if we are to provide a name query parameter, then instead of performing or basically returning all objects, we're going to return our query set as what we get, or we're going to just basically say products or objects dot filter, and then we are going to use this name I contain. So that will basically search for a name that looks exactly like what we have in our name param or name query param. And once I've done that, then I'll just go ahead and return this query set instead and save. So if I go back here, I will list create, so local variable query set where it's not associated with a value. Let me come right here. So what I can do instead is to come and say, let me just start by saying query set is going to be equal to self.get query set, or let me just say it's going to be equal to products.objects, so all.order by negative created at, and then we shall then perform this right here. So it was trying to look for this, but it wasn't defined in the scope. If I go back here and refresh, we now have all our items being returned. What if we wanted to filter by a name? So let me start by Toyota. So if I say I want to return all cars that have Toyota in their name, now I see that Toyota cars are being filtered. So this is basic filtering. Let's say I wanted to return cars that have their name having something like, let's say Ford. I would say Ford, and then that will filter, and then I'll have Ford Ranger, Ford Raptor, Ford Mustang, and so on and so forth. So if I wanted to, let's say, search for cars that have Honda in their name, that will be Honda Civic, Honda CRV, Honda Accord. So those are the cars I have right in here. So this is basic filtering, and you can do it via your query parameters through the get query set command. So yeah, that's basically what you do right here. So yeah, that's basic filtering. You can also use complex filters. You can employ a package or a third-party tool called Django Filter. What Django Filter does is to help you be in position to perform complex queries on your model using filter set classes that you defined. So a very simple example is one I have here. I want to search for cars or for products based on name, and I can also search for products based on, let's say, the max price and the min price. To start, I'm going to go ahead and first of all stop our server. I'll then use uv pip to install Django filter. So I'll say uv pip install Django dash filter. That will add the Django filter package. And once that is done, this is an external app, so we have to go ahead and register it on our project through our settings. So I have to go to settings, installed apps, and then I'll add Django filters. So the project is called Django filter, but the app in Django is referred to as Django filters, so keep that in mind. I also do a little formatting here, and that will change our file to look something like that. So if we go back here, the first thing we do is to set a filter backend. So what I'll do is to go ahead and first of all import the filter backend. I will go right here. So let me actually just copy what I have, because all of this code exists in the description. So what I have to do is to go ahead and import this up to here, and then I'll just do the explanation to save time. So when I go right here, I will change what I have up to the product list create view, and then I'll add our Django filters code right here. So I'm going to get rid of some of the things I have here. I'll say from Django REST framework, import that. Models import products. I'll import our serializers. And then I'll go ahead and remove what we have at the top right here. So this will be our file. Hoping that I do not have anything that's not defined. Let me see. I think I have quite a lot of things that are not defined. For example, I think everything is fine. So let me get rid of all of these. Now, I think starting from here. Yeah, so that's going to be our views. So what Django filter does is to provide you ways of performing complex queries. So this can be things like a field lookup, like the one we have for our name right here, and a range lookups. For example, want to search for items that are in between a certain price and another price. So you can perform such actions. You can perform lookups that have ranges and very many other things that are much more complex when you get to think of filtering. All you have to do when you use the Django filter package is to create a filter set class, and then inside that class you can go ahead and then describe what you're going to do when you're filtering. For example, in this case, we want to filter using the name. We create a filter, sharp filter, and then we specify how we're going to look up that name. So I'm using iContains. This is very similar to what we had implemented at first. Secondly, we are going to search for items using a max price and a min price. And once that is done, all we have to do is to point to the model and specify the fields we can use. That's in case we want to specify the fields. That to work, you have to go, for that to work, you have to go in your view, specify the filter backends list, and then you provide those right here. So that's basically how it works. And then the filter set class you want to use. So that can provide you with much more complex filtering. If I show how that works, if I go back to my pagination right here, but for the purposes of this video, let me try to actually do something like this. Name equals Toyota and price, max price is, I was supposed to search using max price and min price. So let me just go ahead and do this. For the purposes of this video's length, I want to go ahead and just run through that document. So that's basically what you have right here. So that will go ahead and search. Let's say max price is 12,000. Of course, we have only one that is 12,000. if I say mean price is going to be, let's say, 30,000. That will return this, that, and that. And then if I say max price is that, of course, there's no car that has that price in our database. Let me try to see. So max price, that will return all vehicles that have their max that will be less than or equal to 30,000. So that's the kind of filtering you can perform using Django filter. I'm going to leave that as well in the documentation so that you guys can go ahead and check it out. It's a really powerful package that provides you filtering on steroids. So yeah, you can go ahead and check out its documentation. So another feature that I'm not going to be talking about so much is throttling. Throttling in Django is basically one way to help you limit the number of requests the client can make to your API within a specified period. We've all looked at those applications where you can have a number of requests you can perform a day or an hour. And if you perform those past what you're required to perform or past the number of requests you perform, then the application will tell you that you're not allowed to perform such requests. So using Django REST framework, you can also have ways to perform such actions where you limit the number of requests users who are authenticated can perform and requests that users who are not authenticated can perform. All of that is found on the documentation of Django REST framework. So you can please go ahead and read through that. It's a really interesting topic. So for purposes of saving time, I'm now going to go to the next section where I talk about authentication. So the next thing we're going to talk about is authentication and authorization. Authentication is the process of identifying users through the requests they make. So what Django REST framework or the server does is to provide credentials on every request that the client makes, and those credentials will then be used to identify who is making the request to what endpoint. Authorization, on the other hand, is the process through which you then go ahead and determine who has access to what or who performs whatever action in the system. It's the process of providing roles and permissions, and based on those roles, you can allow people to access resources or perform some actions within the system. So we're going to be looking at how to do that in Django REST framework. Django REST framework provides inbuilt types of authentication like section authentication and token-based authentication. But I'm going to be talking about token authentication, and then I'll be showing you how to implement JWT authentication. To start, we're going to set up token-based authentication. So if you're wondering what token-based authentication is, it is a type of authentication where a client will provide a string, which is a token that uniquely identifies that user who has made the request. Now, in token-based authentication, Django will create that token or generate that token. And once it creates that token, it will store it in the database. So it's not going to be changing. So every time a user will log in with their username and password, or with their email and password, or whatever other username they set up, Django REST framework will provide a string, and that string will be provided on every request that the client will make. So let's go ahead and look at how to set it up. The first thing we're going to do is to head over to our settings.py, right where we installed our REST framework app. We're going to go ahead and add another app, which is going to provide for us the token-based authentication. So we're going to add an app called the Auth Token app. Another thing we're going to do is to head over to our REST framework settings dictionary right here. And what we're going to add is a list of default authentication classes. This is going to be a list, and the list is going to contain authentication classes. But for now, I want to make use of REST framework's token authentication class. So we're going to say this is going to come from REST framework dot authentication dot token authentication. And once we have been able to do that, we shall save. If we head over back to our server, we shall see that we have multiple unapplied migrations. So these are specific to introducing the token based authentication. So once I'm done doing that, I'll go ahead and stop our server, then run the command uv run manage.py. And for this case, I want to go ahead and migrate to make those changes reflect in our database. So once we have been able to do that, the next thing we're going to do is to also create a token for our current user. So one thing that is interesting about Django is that every time you add an app, you can be able to see the commands you run on that specific app whenever you run manage.py. So here we see another app has been added, and that's going to be the drf create token. So what this command does is to allow a user who exists in our system to get a token. So we have our super user who I created in the previous videos. I'm going to be creating a token for them. So I'll say uv run manage.py drf create token, and then I'll provide the username of that user. If I enter, I'll now see generated token that. So we need to have that token memorized, or else you can't perform requests. Next, we're going to go ahead and check our database app. So if I take you to our admin, I refresh, shall now, our server is not running, so I have to first of all run it again. If I run our server, head over back here and refresh, shall now see other tables right here, and that is the tokens table. So now that we have one token, it is stored right here, and this is the key that we shall provide in every request the user will make. So how are we going to protect our endpoints so that users access them with a token? Django has inbuilt permissions that we can add onto our views, and those can allow us to have that functionality for protecting the views so that users who have specific permissions can access them. Let's go ahead and add some protection to our list endpoint. For now, if we try to access all products or list all products, we can just list them just like the way you see right here. So to add some security onto them, we shall need to add the permission class onto them. So if I go to our views.py of our products, we're going to go ahead and import a permission to allow only authenticated users to access the endpoint. For us to do that, we shall say from REST framework dot permissions shall import. So there are a lot of permissions. There is admin user if you want an admin user to access the endpoint. If you want authenticated users only, or users who have the authorization credentials, then you can use is authenticated. If you want to restrict them from performing, let's say post requests or any update requests, you can say is authenticated or read only. So let's use that is authenticated for now. We're going to head over back to our view right here, which is our product list create view. And on every class-based view is going to be a permission classes list attribute. So that list of attributes will take in just classes that we're going to be using for permissions. And that's where we're going to add this is authenticated. So when you try to access that endpoint right now, if I refresh, we shall now see that we need credentials to access that token. Now that's not something that we can do right here. So what I'm going to do is to open up my API client, and that's where I shall see how we can provide our token in the request so that we can perform the request. So I'm right here in my API client, which is RESTFox, and I've made the request to that specific product list endpoint. We now see that we are required to provide authentication credentials to access that specific list of products. So the way we go ahead and provide that request is by going to our section right here. So in RESTFox, the interface will look something like this, where you can provide the body, you can provide query params, you can provide headers, authentication, or authorization, and that. So for the case of token-based authentication, I'm going to go to the header section right here and then add an item. The key is going to be, or the name of the header is going to be authorization, and then the value is going to be in this format. So what I'm going to do is to write token and then the value of the token we want to provide for this request. So I'm going to do that by going right in our terminal right here where I created that token. I'll copy it. And once I copy it, I'll go ahead and paste it in my RESTFOX. So it's going to be token followed by the value of the token. So if I send this time, we shall now see that we are authorized to access our products, so to list our products. So that's how you can easily protect your routes. You just have to add a permission class onto them via the permission classes attributes. That's if you're using the class-based views. Now let's go ahead and implement the endpoint that the user will use to access that token, because they're not going to be always having to create their token from the terminal. So for us to do that, we shall head over to our routes or our routes, and that's going to be in urls.py of core. So I'm going to go ahead and import the following. I'm going to access REST framework .auth token, and inside there is where I'm going to get the views. So there is a view for allowing us to obtain that token, and that is called the obtain auth token view. So once I've imported that, I'll go ahead and create a path here. So that path is going to be the /auth/token path, and that is where we shall provide our username and password and then get that token. So that is where we shall register or map the view obtain auth token. I'll go ahead and save, and then we shall have that token created for us, or that URL on which we shall access our tokens. So the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and set up, or let's actually access that endpoint. If I go to RESTFOX right here, I'll create a new request. I'll call this request obtain token. And here is where I'll go and say localhost 8000/auth/token. So this is going to expect us to provide the, I have to provide the HTTP here and then change my URL. So if I try to send this method not allowed, so we should access it with post. And now I see I need to add that extra slash at the end. So now we have to provide our username and our password. If I go to body, I'll select JSON. If I try to send, this time I'll see that I'll get that token. One thing to note is that this token is the same token like what we have here. So the database will keep it, and it will be just the only token that the user will use. However, you can also generate another token for the user or create them another token. So yeah, that's basically how token authentication works. Now in a real app, you want to have scenarios in which you make users automatically have tokens the moment they sign up if you're using token-based authentication. So that's where a signal comes in. So a signal is basically Django's way of performing an action based on what action has happened. In this case, I have an example where I show how you can create the signal for creating a user every time the new user account is created. So you go ahead and create the signal every time you save a user. So this is at receiver post save. What this does is to listen for every time a user instance will be saved or every time a user will be created. And if the user object has been created, we shall basically create a new token. So this token class is basically the model that we see right here. So what Django will do in that case is to go ahead and create for us a new token every time that we create a new user. So that's basically how you can manage creating of tokens automatically. I'm not going to go through that, but if you know how to use signals in Django, you'll basically figure out how to do that. So that's basically it. Now, another thing that we're going to be talking about is the JWT authentication. So JWT authentication is a much more modern and highly scalable approach to security, and you provide tokens known as JWTs, or some people pronounce them as JWTs. So JWTs are compact URL self-means for representing claims transferred between two parties. The primary advantage is that they are self-contained. They carry all the necessary information that you'll need within the token, and you can send them to allow the server to verify the user without querying the database for every single request. So what happens is, in case you need to authenticate users without having to always query the database, you can store all the information that is just enough to identify the user in that token. And the token can have attributes to it, such as the header, the payload, and the signature. So those are like the structure of a token. You can go ahead and read through this section, and I'll go ahead and just basically talk about the Django REST Framework Simple JWT library. So the Django REST Framework Simple JWT library is the easiest and most popular way to implement JWT authentication in your Django REST Framework project. If you go to its documentation, if I search Simple JWT, I'll then go to the Simple JWT documentation right here. This is a project that is maintained by JustBand, and yeah, you can go ahead and read through the documentation. So let's go ahead and install this. To install this, I'll go ahead and speed run through this for the purpose of time. We shall install Django REST Framework Simple JWT in our terminal. I'll stop our server, and then I'll say uv pip install, and then I will add our Django REST Framework Simple JWT. So as that is added, I'll uv pip freeze to our requirements.txt, and once I've done that, I'll rerun our server again. So first things first, we need to add its authentication class to our REST Framework default authentication classes. So I'm going to be getting rid of this REST Framework token authentication for now, and I'm going to replace it with the authentication class for REST Framework Simple JWT. So I'll go ahead and just add this line right here. So this is a custom or a third-party authentication class. When I add that, then we shall be good to go. So how does Django REST Framework Simple JWT work? It works by providing for us views, the functions that we make requests to and get tokens. So let's go ahead and set those up. So what I'm going to do is to go to our URLs right here. You can create a separate auth package, but I'm going to just keep it to our simple urls.py of our project. And the first thing I'm going to do is to come right here and say path. And in this case, we are going to first of all import the views. So before we create the path, let's actually have our views. So I'm going to come right here and say from REST Framework Simple JWT dot, in this case we shall access the views. We want to import the following. So I'm going to import the token. So there are a lot of views. There is token blacklist in case you want to revoke a token. There is token obtain pair, so that will give you the access and the refresh token. There is token verify, which lets you verify if a token is valid. There are very many. Honestly, I can't cover all of them through the video, but I'm going to be showing you how to use these four. So the token, the first we need is the token obtain pair view. That's going to be like our login view for helping us acquire an access and a refresh token. An access token is going to be a short-lived token that will be used to authenticate users every time they'll make a request. However, a refresh token is going to be a long-lived token that we shall use to obtain new access tokens in case those JWTs or access tokens are expired. So the token refresh view is the one that shall provide a refresh token in order to access a new access token, and that's going to be very useful. Once we want to get rid of a refresh token, we provide it to the token blacklist view, so that will get rid of it so that we can no longer create more access tokens to use to perform those requests. So let's go ahead and set this up real quick. I'm going to come right here. I'll create our first view. I'll just maybe call this auth/login or auth/obtain token. So this is going to take in the class-based view called the token object obtain pair view dot as view, and then this will have a name. So let's just say get token pair. And those will be our views. So you can perform requests to these views so that we can access our tokens. So let's go back to our API client and see this in action. I'll go back to RESTful right here, and now this doesn't exist, so we need to make requests to the views that exist. I'm going to close this, but let me rename this to obtain token pair and enter. So if I try to change this, our URL is obtain token, or let me just say obtain token pair and save. So if I go back to our RESTful right here and say this is going to be our localhost 8000 / auth, did I call that auth? Yeah, auth obtain token pair. So let me just copy paste it right here. If I come send this, we now see we have our access and refresh token, but that only works if we provide our username and our password. If we don't provide them, we shall get that those are required. Therefore, we need to provide them and then log in. So that's our refresh token, and that's our access token. Now let's go ahead and try to use those to access our products. If I go back to our products right here, we see that authentication credentials are not provided. So we need to go ahead and provide an access token to access such a resource. Now there's a difference between how we do that when dealing with token-based authentication and how we do that with our JWT authentication. In token authentication, we're using token and then the token, but in our JWT authentication, we need to use the scheme, or we need to provide the token or the authorization header in the following way, where I will say bearer and then the value of the token and send, so that there we can access the token. If I disable it, we see that we cannot access the list of products, so the protected endpoints. So that's basically how you access your resources. Now let me go ahead and also show you something interesting. If you go back to our Chrome right here and head over to a website called JWT.io, we can be able to see the various attributes that our JWT or our JWT has. So if I paste that in this JWT debugger right here, let me try to make this dark mode so that you guys can see. If I remove this default token, I can paste in our token, and now we see details about our token. So the first is going to be the JWT header that will show us the algorithm that was used to create the token, which is HS256, and then the type of the token, which is a JWT. Next, we go to our payload section. So these are the claims, or this is the information that is stored in the token. And now we see that we have our user ID. So every time we want to perform an action, we can use the user ID by getting it from the token. Another thing we see is the JWT signature. So this part right here contains that, but that's the information that you have in your tokens. So let's go ahead and save time by looking at the other endpoints we've created. So we created the obtain token pair. Now let's look at the verify token. If I create this, let me say verify token. So this will basically allow us to verify if our token is valid. If I send, this URL is going to be the verified token, so it will be on auth verified token. If I come right here, if I send, this will not be allowed. If I send via post, we now see that we need a token. So if I provide our JSON right here, we're going to provide our token, and then we shall paste in the token that we've used. Let me actually copy the token. Let me just copy it from here and then provide it here. What did I do? So let me try to come right here, copy this, and then I'll paste it inside verify token. So when we provide our token, we now see a 200 OK request. So that shows that our token is valid. If we provide the token that's not valid, so let's say that, we now see the token is invalid. So that's just one endpoint that can allow you to verify that. Now let's go ahead and also look at the other endpoints. So here we have the refresh token. So I'll provide the URL. So let me go ahead and just provide what we have here. We'll copy this, paste it right here. And then this is going to be refresh token. If I send, that will be a 405. If I send that, we now see that we require to provide a refresh token. So in our body, we shall go provide the JSON, and then we shall set the value of the refresh token. So I'll go to obtain token pair, and instead of getting the access token, this time I will copy and provide the refresh token. So I'll come right here and say that's going to be our refresh token. So that way we can access many other access tokens. Another one is going to be the one for blacklisting a token. So let me also show you how to do that. So if I come right here, I'll just copy a URL for the purpose of saving time. This is going to be a post request. If I send this, we now see we need a refresh token. So that will revoke a token. So if I provide refresh, I'll provide the value to be our refresh token. So let me go to where we obtained our pair, copy the refresh token. So if I come right here, paste it here. If I send, we now see that, oh, this is the refresh token endpoint. I wanted to blacklist this token, so I call that blacklist token. So if I come to RESTFox and say blacklist, I'll send, and now we see auth blacklist token. I think I have a mistake, so this is token obtained pair. Sorry for this. I'm going to change this and change it to token blacklist view. If I send the request again, we now see that's 200. So we can no longer use this token to access or get access tokens. If I try to do that with refresh token using the same token, I'll now see, okay, so seems I have a problem here. So if I try to, let's say, get this token right here, which is our refresh token, and blacklist it, I shouldn't be in position to make a request to obtain new access tokens using this token. So if I try, that's interesting. I don't know if I've made a mistake somewhere. Of blacklist token, blacklist token. So according to the Django REST framework simple JWT documentation, we need to go ahead and set up the token blacklist functionality. It's like a separate app that performs this functionality. So what we can do is to come right here, add the REST framework simple JWT to token blacklist app, and then migrate or make changes to the database. I think it does some kind of storage to keep the token persisted, or information about the token persisted, so that you can no longer perform requests with it. So what I'm going to do is to go to urls.py. I'm actually supposed to go to settings.py, and just like I installed the REST framework auth token, I'm going to go ahead and add the REST framework simple jwt.token blacklist. And once I've done that, then we can run python manage.py migrate, because we have some 12 unapplied migrations. So if I stop our server and then run migrate, we'll now see those are added. We run our server again. This time if I go to our settings.py, or this is our admin, if I refresh, we shall have another app right here, and that will have our blacklisted tokens. So according to what we did, we just registered the token blacklist view without having to perform all these actions. So please go ahead and read through the documentation. So yeah, this is basically how it works. If we try to revoke or try to make that token blacklisted again, if I go to blacklist token, send a request, that will be okay. What I'm trying to do is to use the same request to access new token. If I send now, we shall see that our token is blacklisted, and therefore we cannot perform a request with the token. JWT authentication is such an interesting topic, and I honestly do not want to spend this entire video talking about that. But the idea is you get tokens, you can delete tokens, you can create new tokens using refresh tokens, and so on and so forth. I think I do a good job of trying to explain how that works in this section right here. So please go ahead and check it out. I'll also add the details of how to add that token blacklist view by the time this video is up. So yeah, that's basically how you implement simple JWT authentication using the Django REST framework. Authentication is such an amazing topic, and if you want to perform all kinds of authentication, Django REST framework can give you the freedom to do what you want. All you have to do is to specify your different authentication schemes. You can even use third-party authentication services or social logins and stuff like that, but that is so out of scope of this video. So the next thing I talk about is API integration. So API integration is basically how you work with external APIs. This can be APIs to help you perform different actions or add some functionality in other applications onto your API. So normally when doing such things, you're going to be needing an API client. For example, Postman, that's if you're on the front end, but you're going to be in Python, so you need tools like requests, which is the request library. This is very important. You can use it to perform requests and get back responses, and then perform all kinds of actions within your code in Python. Another library you can use is HTTPX. So HTTPX is a much more modern alternative to requests, and that will help you to perform requests in the same way. You can even perform things using async IO. So it has all those ways, all that support for your both WSGI applications and ASGI applications. So if you're using something modern, you can use HTTPX to make requests, but you can also perform those requests that are specific to Django and the Django REST framework, which is WSGI by default. So yeah, this section is not something I'm going to go through it, but please feel free to check it out. I will end the video here, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this video and you would like to watch some of these talks or some of these presentations I make out there, please click the like button, and do not forget to share with me what you think about this in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in API development, backend development, and some other topics related to software development and any other thing. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.